Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. I'm recording this Thursday evening, so if your question came in Thursday night or Friday morning, I probably would have missed it, but definitely re-ask or just message me directly if it's something really important, because I never mean to miss anybody's questions. It's always stuff like this, or just a mistake at the end if I accidentally delete it in post. But anyway, let's jump in and see what we got. First up, over on Floatplane, Jonathan Chapman said you had previously shown a short Scart connector from going to from the G-Scart switch straight into an OSSC. I'm pretty sure you mean this one right here. They'd like to get one to go from a Pi to Scart to an RGB to comp, but don't see it on the web. Can you check if anyone is selling it and maybe add a link on the Scart page? So that was a project that got delayed that should have been released like 6 months ago or something. And it should have been out this weekend too. So I think it's only like a week away, but at the moment it's available for purchase, or I believe it's probably going to be a very short pre-order and then main purchase. There's going to be a post on RetroRGB. I'll obviously then talk about it in the weekly roundup. And thanks for reminding me, though. I will add it to the Scart page. I probably would have forgotten. I spend so much time on articles and videos and stuff like that I very often forget, oh, wow, I already have pages dedicated to stuff like this. So thank you for the reminder, Jonathan. But yeah, I really do love this thing. I think it's one of these things that you're either going to look at it and go, that's totally useless, or you're going to look at it and go, that's exactly what I need for my setup. So hopefully this thing will finally be available in like a week. Now over on Patreon, following up from our discussion last week with Robert Dickinson on why you would want to remove the GDMU if you were updating the firmware on your DC Digital. And I had totally forgotten about the reasonings for this. And even when I responded to you in the chat here, I still kind of forgot a little bit of what happened. So allow me a moment to explain it. Sorry for getting it wrong. It just totally slipped my mind. So on Dan's DC Digital page on his website, he recommends that people remove the GDMU when updating the firmware on the DC Digital. And the reason for this is because the GDMU tends to block the Wi-Fi signal from hitting and could cause issues. Now, the reason I never have any problems is because I'm usually right by my router. Actually, pretty much any place in my tiny New York apartment's right by the router, but normally I'm either at my desk or at the TV, all of which are like 6 feet away from the router, so I never have that issue whatsoever. But there's a little more to it than that. Now, if you leave it in, and if you place it next to your router or something, and you watch the download finish to 100%, then everything's fine. You don't need to take it out at all. But the problem is, if it doesn't download all the way, and you try to flash it, you could be flashing a corrupt file. And while that doesn't happen very often, coincidentally, right after talking with you about it and reading up on that, a friend of mine had that happen to them, where they hit download, they walked away, they came back and assumed it finished, did the update process, and then they had to manually reflash their DC Digital with an external programmer. So yes, if you want to absolutely remove any chance of any kind of corruption whatsoever, do exactly what you did, remove the GDMU, throw in your optical drive back, update it, and then put it back in. Or, maybe we could look into adding an antenna extension for it. So wire in an external antenna that you glue in somewhere or something. I don't know. There might be another way to go about doing that. But yeah, I was wrong. What I said, I think it's safe to go ahead and do it. It's safe to go ahead and do it if you watch the process and you make sure everything completes properly. And if you have any apprehension, correct, just pull out the GDMU and then flash it that way. But I think something like a Wi-Fi antenna extender or something like that, or just placing it right next to your router might be easier in some people's setups. But sorry for forgetting all about that. It's one of those weird issues that I don't ever really have, so it completely slipped my mind. So sorry about that. Sean Richmond has a Super Nintendo with a stock power supply and HD Retrovision cables going into a mechanical component switch, into a RetroTink 2X Pro multi-format, through a cheap mechanical HDMI switch to an LG OLED. When they play the first Ghost House in Super Mario World on the FX Pack Pro, they get a white horizontal line of interference that will flicker white about a third of the way down the screen. When they put in an actual cartridge of Super Mario World, it does not exhibit this behavior, and it also happens on other ROMs on the FX Pack Pro as well. And the ROM that they're using was pulled from the original cartridge using a Retro 2. Do you think it could be my voltage regulator? So you did a lot of troubleshooting already, or at least provided a lot of info, which is awesome. So here's what I think you should do in this order. The first thing I would do is just try a different firmware revision just to see if that works. Maybe try the Super Game Boy version that's out, maybe go back to an older one. And you don't even have to really change anything. You could just take the folder that's already on your SD card, rename it add an underscore original to the end, and drop any other firmware folder in there, and that's it. You could switch between them as many times as you want. There's no weirdness. There's no flashing. You basically just drop the folder in and go and see if that makes a difference. If not, I would try disabling in-game hooks of any kind, in-game menus, basically disable any feature that the FX Pack Pro has just to see if that helps. And that's only a few minutes worth of work, so I would start there. If that doesn't work, I would check the Crix forums to see if anybody else has had the same issue. And of course, the best course of action after that would be to try a different Super Nintendo. If you don't have access to one, that might get a little tricky, but I would try that as well just to see. Because even if you mailed this to a friend that lives kind of close, had them try it, mail it back or something, if it happens on another Super Nintendo, it's definitely the FX Pack or the configuration or something. Whereas if it only happens on yours, then it's hardware. I would also, just for the heck of it, try going direct into the 2XM into the LG OLED. I think there's 0.5% chance of that making any difference whatsoever, but it's a free solution that might only take a moment depending on your setup. So, I'd try that just for the heck of it. But if the problem doesn't follow the cart, if the problem really is just your Super Nintendo, then power would be my first guess on that. I would try I would try maybe a different power supply for it. You could pick up one of those triads from Castlemania and get a couple of pigtail adapters. So even if you don't use it, even if your original Super Nintendo power supply turns out to be perfect, you could use this on a ton of other consoles if you ever needed to. And they're pretty inexpensive. It's not a big investment. I would try anything internal on the Super Nintendo last, because I've never really seen a voltage regulator do that. Not on a Super Nintendo anyway. And the FX Pack Pro is a pretty efficiently built thing. So just for an example, anybody who had the white line issue on one chip or mini Super Nintendos, where on an all black screen, you'd have a white line going down the middle. That doesn't happen if you're using the original FX Pack or the FX Pack Pro, because it turns out it was a power filtering issue, and the power filtering on the FX Pack is really good. So basically, I said that just to let you know that, generally speaking, using the FX Pack could help problems like that, not so much cause them. I would just determine first, does the problem follow the FX Pack or the Super Nintendo, and go there. And hopefully the tips I gave you could get you started. And also, thank you so much for all your kind words. I really appreciate that. Rick Lewis said 2 completely unrelated questions. First, a couple of years ago, I bought an NES on eBay from a seller with great reviews that was modded with an sRGB. Now, a few years later, I've never had any problems, but I took it apart, and man, is it a crappy looking job inside. Long wires going everywhere. If I'm not having any problems, should I just leave it? Or is it better in the long run to find somebody that'll assemble it better? You're gonna have to make that decision yourself. Unfortunately, the technical reasons to do that would be if anything was run improperly, if anything's shorted together that might not be affecting your video output but is still there. There aren't many safety issues at all, and if you've had something that's been working for years, it's probably fine. It would make me nervous, but unfortunately, you're just gonna have to roll the dice on that one. And to be honest, I'm pretty sure I would even know the person that you bought that from if you showed a picture of the inside. I'm pretty sure I could even guess where that came from. And unfortunately, as much as Voltar and myself and other members of the community have tried to warn people against these notorious eBayers and against stuff like this, we can't get to everybody. It's probably the same. Your situation is probably the same as everybody else's. You searched on eBay, you checked, they had good feedback, they had good reviews, so you bought it, and then later on, you stumbled across one of my videos that warned people about stuff like this. So, we try to get to as many people as possible, but sorry that you ended up not getting what you had hoped for, but it's up to you if you want to mess with it at all. But if it's already working, maybe leave well enough alone until there's an upgrade. Maybe you want to add an in-game reset board. If that was the case, if there was a reason for a modder to open it up anyway, like adding a new feature or doing a recap just for preservation purposes or whatever else, then then have them rewire it. But if not, maybe just wait until you feel like doing any of that other stuff. And second, your website's post on the Triad power supply has a link to an adapter for the Famicom HVC001. The bottom of my Famicom says HVC002. Is it safe to use with this Famicom, and will it work? I have no clue. All kidding aside, if the links that I posted, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I do know that the link that I posted in that full thing that linked to both Castlemania and to Firebrand X and DigiKey, all of that was verified like 3 different times over. So if it says that type of that Triad power supply in Pigtail will work with an original Famicom, it should work with all of the original Famicoms. If anybody else has any thoughts, maybe chime in. I am wrong occasionally on this stuff, but I'm pretty sure this is one of those things that we had checked up on, and it should be fine. Chris Madire, I'm really sorry. Please let me know how to pronounce it. I promise I'll try to get it right. They said they wanted to follow up to a previous question, and no reason to put this on the podcast, but I do actually have a question for you. They have a Super NT, an FX Pack Pro, and a mixer, and they were getting an audio noise through it. And I think my advice may have been to turn off or toggle cartridge audio in the advanced options of the Super NT. And if that wasn't my advice, that should have been my advice, so apologies. But you say it's working as long as you use the FX Pack Pro and not a standard cartridge. So 2 questions. Can you try on both toggling cartridge audio on or off to see if that makes a difference? And if you have an FX cartridge like Star Fox, Yoshi's Island, anything like that, basically any cartridge with the 2 extra tabs at the bottom, try that cartridge as well as a standard and see if it makes a difference. But it sounds like you're passing cart audio, and if there's nothing there, if there's no extra audio being generated, then the Super NT is trying to look for a signal and just hearing an analog buzz. So give that a try and see if it works. Let me know if you have any issues, but I read your question twice just to make sure I didn't miss it. I don't think you'd mentioned cartridge audio toggling on the Super NT, and I think that might be the issue. Oliver Menard wanted to know if I had any advice on a Philips Superscreen 46. So I had to look that up. I didn't know what it was, but it looks like a giant CRT that was sold in Australia. So my advice on this is my advice on all CRTs. If it's standard definition only, it should be perfect for retro gaming. Use the highest inputs possible on it. So in most cases, so if it's got only composite, cool, it's still going to be awesome. If it has S-video or component video or RGB Scart, try those inputs if you're looking for a sharper signal. You don't need a sharper signal. Some people prefer it, some people don't. Some people like the original look of the soft composite video. If you're into modding, you might want to look into see if anybody's ever done anything to it. So if it doesn't have extra inputs, can those be added? Just know that it's extremely dangerous to mod a CRT if you don't know what you're doing. If you do know how to discharge it properly, it's like working on everything else. But that's the really scary part, is if you don't know how to properly discharge, you could get mildly electrocuted, which could, obviously that's never a good thing. So that's pretty much it. If it's an HD CRT, so if it does 480p, 720p, 1080i, it might be one of those that processes classic game signals wrong for the same reasons that most flat panel TVs do that as well. So if that's the case, it would still be awesome for something like PlayStation 2 or any of the 480p consoles, but there really wasn't any more information on it. So if you have pictures of the back you want to share, if you have anything else, anything specific, I'll happily try to point you in the right direction for cool stuff to do. And is Super Screen 46? Is that 46 inches? Because that would be gigantic. That would be like a 300 and something pound TV. And also, welcome to the Patreon Q&As. Thanks for asking. Photos Fine said that they're going to get a GameCube after they learned about Game Boy Player and Game Boy Interface, and they're getting a GC Loader too, but should they get a PAL or NTSC console living in Europe? They're planning to buy one with a digital port for use with an HDMI adapter, so the thing with NTSC not having analog RGB out is no problem. I would get whatever one's easiest, I guess, at that point, because if you're using GC Loader or any kind of solution that boots Homebrew, you could boot to Swiss first, which is what I'd like to do anyway, even if I'm playing original discs, and then you could force pretty much any video mode you want. So if you're living in Europe, I would just pick up a PAL one with a digital output, and you should be okay. You should be able to force all the modes that you need. And if you have an RGB monitor, it's cool to have the RGB Scart capability for Game Boy Player, but if you're going all digital, I don't think it matters at all. I mean that in a nice way. I would just pick up whatever's the cheapest one with a digital output. Mark Main wanted to know if I had a suggestion on an affordable automatic HDMI switch. It doesn't need to be dual output, but they have bought a couple that won't detect a signal from RetroTinks. That's strange. I haven't really had many issues with RetroTinks, but I don't use switches very often, so I'm a pretty terrible person to ask this question because of that, because I usually direct plug everything, even my game consoles. I have one HDMI cable run from the input of my TV that's always set to game mode all the way over to like the only spot in the apartment where there's room to plop a console down, and then I just plug everything in one at a time whenever I want to use it, which is not the most efficient way for most people, but one of the main reasons why I do it this way is because of all the trouble I've had with HDMI switches, including trouble that some people have bought the same switch from the same link and they have no problems whatsoever, and I can't get audio to pass through consistently or something weird like that. So my suggestion would be to check out Dirk Swizzler's post on Shmups about HDMI equipment, check out the or the first post, and then just kind of see what people have been using lately. I do follow that thread, and I know that a few things that people had been purchasing that did work are now no longer available, so it's kind of something that you have to keep up on. And this is also the reason why I haven't done like an in-depth HDMI switch shootout or something, because I'd spend $1,000 on switches, spend 2 or 3 weeks of my life making this video, and then essentially, it would be completely outdated in 6 months and I would have to do it all over again. So I think relying on stuff like forums like that and people testing in real time is probably the better way to go about that. But I guess that's probably the best way to check at the moment. I really would love to see a gaming-focused HDMI switch where you could have options that, especially retro gaming focused, where maybe you could set options that people with just like a PS4 or PS5 are gonna, wouldn't run into those problems. But yeah, I would just stick with Dirk Swizzler's post on Shmups and kind of go from there. Well, that's about it for this week. I guess I'll give just a quick channel update because this wasn't on the longer side. And, as always, I don't ever try to force any of this stuff. I just answer the questions in as much time as it takes where I feel like I was able to answer it properly. And sometimes I drone on for hours and other times it's kind of quick like this week. But since there's a few extra minutes and since I haven't been hitting the videos as hard, I figured I would just give a quick explanation of what's going on, and it's pretty much not anything important. But I guess for like the past 10 months, I think I've gotten 3 videos a week consistently and only missed like 3 times total. The weekly podcast, the Q&A, and then some other kind of review or interview or, whatever else. And I missed last week, and I'm probably going to miss this weekend too. And the only reason is just because of all of the other stuff I'm working on. I love being busy. I love all the projects I'm involved in, but these days, if I start working on anything else other than the normal weekly content, it takes away from those. And I had the written review of the Scart Switch, which I spent a lot of, I spent spent pretty much as much time as I would have on a video on that one. And then I have 2 other posts for upcoming products that I wanted to make sure the posts were high production. I'll try to get to a video if I can, if I have time, but at the very least, when these products launch, I want to make sure that I have a post to accompany it so people would have some solid info on what it is, and at least a written review showing that, yes, it's an awesome product. Here's all the links and all that stuff. So those take a lot of time, to the point where, I probably should have just had videos prepared for them as well. But doing all that stuff takes away from the other things. So I don't know how, I've been doing the 3 videos a week consistently because I like putting out content, but I was also kind of hoping that would help with the YouTube algorithm, which I'm still buried in that. So as far as any other changes go that I've been talking about to how things are done on the site, where things are put and all that, I still haven't really figured out what the right thing to do is. So I think I'm just going to figure this out before the end of the year, make a decision, and just not look back and say, here's what it is now. Podcasts are over here, videos are over here, or whatever the heck we decide on. So I guess that's just like a brief overview of channel update, why I haven't had some fancier videos last week and possibly not this weekend. I may be able to finish one tomorrow, but we'll see. So yeah, as always, thank you so much to everybody that participates in these, and especially thank you to everybody who supports on Floatplane and Patreon and YouTube, because without your support, none of those things I just talked about would be possible at all. All the written posts, the behind the scenes development work, the videos, these things, I love doing them all, and the only way I'm able to do them is through your support. So if you're already supporting, thank you so much. If you enjoy these, please consider throwing $1 a month on Patreon or something. And if you're not in a place to do that right now, that's awesome too. I hope you still enjoy the content. So thank you all very much, and I will see you next week.